Here we are in one of the greatest treasure houses on the planet, holding vast treasures of Maori and Polynesian art. It is at this museum that I met my friend David Simmons over 3 decades ago, who has spent a lifetime collecting mythology and interaction with the Maori people. His depth of knowledge is unsurpassed, and it's been a pleasure to know him and spend a great deal of time with him over the last 3 decades. I'd like to introduce you to my friend, David Simmons.
E koko e popo, popo ko ihi te manu, ka tina Aotea. Hei au, hei au, hei au. No reira ngiwi, ko tai mai nei. Ngā tini aitua ko wehe ki te pō. Haere, haere, haere. Haere ki Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki Pāmamoa. Moira, moira, moira. E ngā iwi katoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. That's the beginning, the greeting to this place, to the dead, because I couldn't talk without doing that. So we're greeting the world and we're greeting all of you people here. And in doing that, we're saying tēnā koe, we're recognising you and your mana. All of you. Our family originally settled in the Napier area of Hawke's Bay. The family had moved up here, and so I was born of all my family, and I'm the youngest of 7. I was born here in Auckland about 1930, but my father was originally was in Napier. Then, about 9 years old, he took up a job on a sheep station at Waipiro Bay, up the east coast, and he was there for many years. During that time, he did various things. He was a drover, drove cattle from Hawke's Bay right up to Auckland and Whangarei. Another job he had was taking titled Englishmen on expeditions into the central plains of Taupo, where there were wild horses. So he's a wild horse hunter, and he was then my mother caught up with him in Napier and turned him into a tram driver, which is a bit of a contrast. And then from there he came up to Auckland here, where he was working at various jobs as a milkman, in the brickworks, and then we had various farms around the place. But always, after about 4 years, my father wanted to move somewhere. So our family was, to a large extent, itinerant. While I was born in Auckland, I was actually brought up in the King Country. One of my older brothers went to 11 different primary schools. I didn't. I was lucky. But that's the sort of family we were. My father had standing in the Maori world, and as part of that he was given a special name, Te Puru, and it was under that name that while he was working at a Taitapu sheep station in Hawke's Bay, that he used to go up and help Ruakerana, building his village. And there he was known as Rangi Te Puru. He wasn't known as Bill Simmons, he was known as Rangi Te Puru. And when somebody said to him, why are you allowing him to regard you as a Maori? He said, well, they're much happier that way. So we'll leave it that way. Later on, when the elders around Hawke's Bay, there's a question of the sheep station at Waikato Moana, the lease ending, and the Maori owners wanted to regain the place, so they went through Maori Land Court to do it. And what happened was that Jimmy Carroll was asked by his relatives to come and fetch my father for him to talk on their behalf. And so at the meeting of the Maori Land Court, there was this nondescript-looking Pākehā fella there. Because my father was Maori speaking, and our family have always been associated with the Maori side, my particular interest has been in the Maori people of New Zealand, the original inhabitants, and also in the landscape that I could see, because you cannot walk around this land without seeing where the ancestors have modified the land. Well, when I was a primary school, late primary school, and later on in secondary school, and when I was at training college, I used to hike around New Zealand. I used to have a billy and a sleeping bag because I was interested in seeing places and seeing people and talking to people. Going down the East Coast, my father had said to me, look, you probably won't get into any trouble on the Maori side because you know what to do. But if you do, and the elders question you, just say the name Te Puru. He, in effect, gave me his name, even though I was the youngest son, but I was the one who was interested. So that name I've had all the time, and the elders gave me another name later on. So my full name is Rawiri Te Puru Teriho in Māoridom. Teriho was a ancestor of the Tūhoe people, and I've been named to succeed to him. So that's the way it happens in Māoridom. It's always been part of my existence, wandering around New Zealand. Well, for instance, I went into Mangapohatu in 1949 and walked through, because the road didn't go through there then, and I stayed on Mangapohatu Marae in a house that was sunk into the ground, a punga house, and I slept on the veranda of it. And the old chief of the place, who was still around, he spoke only Maori and I spoke what little Maori I had. He knew who my father was and what the name was. And he gave me a welcome. He prepared a meal for me. He put the meal on the table and he wouldn't eat. And it wasn't until I'd finished that he started eating. That's the old way. And so, just, okay, I learned a lesson on that occasion. And that lesson was your manuhiri, your visitors, always eat first. And so things like that, that's where I've been taught things. From those old people, and then later on, Te Riria, who was elder from Hawke's Bay, he had been taught in the old style, and he was the one who decided that what I was doing at the museum here in Auckland was worthwhile, publishing and so on. And so he and the other elders, Jim Martesi and Joe Thompson and Vi Thompson, decided that what I was doing was good from their point of view. And so they spent time teaching me the things that they knew. They were frightened that what they had been taught through the old Whare system, the College of Learning system, was being lost because there weren't other people being taught in this modern age. And so they thought if they taught me, I could teach their young people about the knowledge that they should have on carvings and various other things like that. So that's how I managed to learn. I got taught. I got picked out and taught. Well, in one sense, it was their own protection. They're stopping me from putting my big hobnailed boots all over their knowledge. I've lived here in various parts of New Zealand and in France and Europe. Went to university, then got a job with Aotearoa Museum Dunedin. I was there for a few years, and then I came up to Auckland to take over as ethnologist, that being an old-fashioned word for an anthropologist, in Auckland Museum, eventually ending up as the assistant director. It's a funny sort of hybrid institution, half natural history museum and half ethnographic museum. But in one sense, there's no real dichotomy between the two because they're all part of the same. In New Zealand, they're all part of the same continuum, that the natural world is part of the Maori is part of the natural world, as are all people who live here. Therefore, it's got a job to do. While it was originally established in 1852 in a disused post office, in 1925, when the people coming back from the First World War wanted a memorial, they wanted something that would pass on the heritage of the past into the present and for the future. And they decided that what they would do was set up a museum. And so they took hold of what was, until then, was called Observatory Hill. Observatory Hill, in fact, had another name, and its name was Pukikawa, firstly because it wouldn't grow kumaras, and secondly because it was Maharatanga. It had been named by Potatau Te Wherewhere of Waikato in 1820 to remember the dead between Ngāpuhi and Waikato. So it was a war memorial just in its own right as a hill. And that's where they established the War Memorial Museum. But it also remembers all the dead of all time. Inga iwi inga hoe wha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Haere mai, haere mai, haere mai. Haere mai ki tēnei whare, ki tēnei puki, te puki Maharatanga kawa o ngā toa o mua. Ki tēnei whare, he Maharatanga, mō ngā toa o ngā pakanga o tuatahi, pakanga tuarua, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, me ero atu pakanga. Nō reira, haere mai, haere mai, haere mai. Ei, whakarongo ki te tangi o te huhu. E hu ana, ke tua o tokotoka. E hu ana, ke tua o mga kekie. Nau mai, haere mai. Inga iwi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koe. Me haere. Let's go. That was a greeting to the dead of ancient times, to the dead of the wars between Waikato and Ngāpuhi and all the other wars that have occurred in New Zealand, then up to the First World War, the Second World War, and then to the other wars which have occurred like Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on, and those that are happening today. And I farewelled them, allowing them to go. Because I'd been talking about them, they would have been here. Therefore, I was allowing them to go back to far distant homeland in the other world.
Well, David, here we are in front of one of the great masterworks of humankind, the Kave figure. What can you tell us more about this?
Well, Kave da Lingirangi, which is her full name, she's the female element in creation.
A mother goddess figure.
Yeah, a mother goddess figure. Her name is also in the name for the Pacific Ocean, Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, or Kiva, or Kave. It's all the same name. And if you go down, right down to southern part of New Zealand, you'll see the bull kelp floating on the sea. That rimurapa is the hair of Kiva or Kawe. She has many mysteries associated with her. And one of the mysteries is that she comes from a little atoll of Nukuoro in Micronesia. Her people are Polynesian, but they live in Micronesia, they're outliers. And here's an atoll. Here is a great figure, large figure, 8 feet tall, which is made from a breadfruit tree. Now, you show me any breadfruit tree on an atoll which is as thick and as big as that.
It's simply amazing, just the thought of it.
So the tree itself must have been absolutely amazing. And did it drift there or did it grow there? We don't know. You look at what Kave is. It's a female figure, utterly simple, beautifully sculptured female figure. And if you say, well, how does this fit into the world art? Well, if you look at the head, that head is what Picasso was trying to do by breaking up all the elements of the head to find out what was the least that you needed to show a human face. That's very human.
Absolutely.
And yet it's very, very simple and almost non-existent. The only line is the nose.
But extremely powerful.
Yeah. The whole thing has got a power all of its own. And if you look at some of Picasso and some of Braque's work, you can see the influence of this figure. So in terms of the world, this, in fact, is a very great artwork. One
of the greatest who can compete at the highest level with the greatest work of Western art.
That's right.
In my eyes.
I mean, the story about how it got off Nukuoro is also the story of the changing of culture. The missionaries went there, they taught the people to be Christians, and so they rejected all things associated with the old world. And so Kubari from Germany was negotiating this figure, but some customs collector from Auckland called Captain Cozzens turned up on the island, Nukuoro, and somehow he got that into his ship.
Amazing.
Together with a lot of some other material, fish hooks and things like that. And that was presented here into the museum in 1878, I think it was.
So extremely early.
It's very early.
One of the first contacts in Nukuoro.
That's right. Well, now here it is. And I don't think there can be anything better.
There isn't. It's the greatest abstraction of human form, in my opinion, in the whole art canon of humankind. So let's head back here to these amazing Tongan figures.
Tongan figures represent something quite different to Kave, in that they represent the female lineage heads after their death.
Matrilineal.
Matrilineal, well, that's a debatable point there. It's not really matrilineal, but the senior female is the most important person in the lineage. And so after she dies, her lineage will keep up their importance by putting a figure of her in a special house. And that's what this is. This is a figure of a lineage female kept in a special house to make sure that lineage still reminds everybody who they are. It's a political thing. The elements of Kave are there in the sense of the abstraction and so on, but the power is not there. Two reasons. One, it's not for the same sort of spiritual purpose. And secondly, the artists just aren't as good as the people who made Kave. But if you look at the other figure that's there, the other little one, that's a figure which has got bent legs, rather curious, it's lost its arms. But what it is a figure in the posture of a supplicant to a king. In other words, this is a person approaching the Tui Tonga or the King of Tonga, the Queen of Tonga, and adopting the position which is appropriate. So that's what that represents. In fact, it's a very interesting thing. It's the only one like it.
Weren't these collected by Reverend Williams?
Yes, and again, it's the change of religion which allowed them to be collected. And also, too, with the development of the new lineages, as they are today, which lead to the present King of Tonga, a lot of the old lineages lost their place in Tonga. And so their things became available, and they still had a certain amount of tapu or kapu associated with them. Power. So easiest place to give them to under the new situation was into the care of a missionary.
Right, makes sense at that time.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that.
It was difficult at that stage for Maori because most of the land had been confiscated following the wars, and so various government departments regarded using Maori land as a gift, not as a something they needed to negotiate. So quite often what Maori found was some of their land had been surveyed and sold off to Europeans. The civil servants knew damn well that the Maori didn't have the financial resources to fight such decisions in court. They could protest about them, but they didn't go to court because they didn't have the money to do it. Right up until 1949, Maori were paid a youth wage. No matter what they did, they were paid a youth wage. No Maori was given a standard wage at all. And so they adopted the system that if you can't get them to do the right thing, get them to join you. And that's what they did to me. Mm-hmm. Let's say they taught me. I had to stand up and they asked me to lead a delegation to select committee in Parliament. And I said, well, look, it's better if this is led by a Maori. And Jim Thompson looked at me and said, but it is led by a Maori. I said, no, led by me. I said, well, you're a Maori. I said, no. I said, yes, you are. We say so. Well, I saw the future of New Zealand involves having a strong Maori culture and a strong Pākehā culture. Together, they would be something and would fulfil the aspirations of Captain Cook in 1770, in which he said that the Maori people are energetic people. Give them the scientific knowledge of the Pākehā and the future is very bright for this country. That was his prediction. What the elders taught me in terms of ariki knowledge, chiefly knowledge, I've tried to publish or pass on most of what I was taught because I was taught very simply, whatever I know, whether I've learnt it or I've been taught it or so on and so forth, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the future. Therefore, if I'm asked to assist on something or if they ask me a question on something, then I've got no choice. I've got to respond to it. I can't say, well, that's my knowledge, get the hell out of it. It's not my knowledge.
Well, David, here we are in front of this very, very powerful lintel figure in the beginning of the Maori collection. Can you tell me more about it?
Well, firstly, it's not a lintel. Well, a lintel in the general sense, because it's actually a waharoa, a gateway, a lintel over a gateway into a village. And it's got many other things about it as well. It's meant to slot over something, right? Because it's carved on both sides. But when you look at it, you look at the central figure, and you're immediately carried into Ravavai, or the things collected by Captain Cook at that period in Polynesia. But if you look at the other designs on it, the chevrons and the manayas either end, those are purely Maori. So the influence of Polynesia is here, but the beginnings of Maori culture and art forms are starting to come forward in here, in this figure.
Especially with those manaya figures on the end.
That's right, because they become a typical symbol of Maori art. In this case, the chevrons represent the various states of existence. The 6 chevrons in the 7th figure, those are the 7 states of existence which govern the life in Polynesia. The manaya represent the spiritual world. So this is very Maori, even though it's very...
It feels Central Polynesian, yet it's very Maori.
That's right. It's the adaptation between Central Polynesia and Maori.
It's fascinating. Here we are in front of a large display of Maori hei tiki. Can you tell us something about these, how they were used, and something about the special large one up there that I believe was collected by Matthew Flinders?
Well, tiki's are pounamu, or greenstone, and a gift of greenstone is a gift of mana, of prestige to the person involved. And most of the tikis on display here, in fact, are ancestral tikis. They would have been owned by various people over various generations, and most of them would have had special names. If you take one of the named tribal tikis back to its home area, then the people get out and greet it as a person.
As a living being.
Yeah, and they greet all the ancestors associated with it. So that it represents that. But it also represents something else, that because it's a prestige item, if a person is made into a chief because of his ability and so on, then he is given a tiki, which shows his authority. And that's what a tiki is. Tiki otherwise follow the shapes and forms of the wood carving from each area.
Tribal areas.
Yep. Though some of them, I mean, the tikis from the South Island have got heads which are not as big as the body and so on and so forth, all those sorts of things. Those are in the wood carving as well. When Captain Cook came on the first voyage, he saw 3 tikis and he could not trade for any of them.
They were that special.
Because they're all prestigious. When he came on the second voyage, just about every Maori had a tiki, and he's quite willing to trade half a yard of red kersey cloth for it. In other words, it was the beginning of the tourist industry. And quite a few of the tiki, they replaced the pawa with red ochre around them in the eyes. And that was replaced by just red sealing wax.
Which is a very common thing in that time period in New Zealand that the Pakeha brought in.
In this display, you can see the differences, and you can see some of the very ancient tikis. You've got Matthew Flinders' tiki collected in 1790, according to the records. It's a very large tiki, which is unusual, because usually the early tikis are small. The very large tikis are later.
When you talk about late, 1790 to 1820?
No, I'm talking about 1830, 1840, up to 1860. You get tikis which are large. You don't normally get large tikis at an early period. That's why that Matthew Flinders one is rather curious.
Well, it's right, but if it is actually collected by Matthew Flinders in 1790, it represents a transitional to a large size from some of these smaller ones.
Yes, it does. But in fact, it's not the size of the tiki. Quite often what used to happen was that if you had an ancestral piece of greenstone, then it'd be cut up with a attrition saw, which is sand and quartz, and made into various gifts for other tribes. And quite often, one of the gifts they made was hei tikis.
And that, of course, that jade source only originated in the South Island. Is that correct?
That's correct. In the rivers of the South Island. And polishing of jade, of Pounamu, was in fact the work of the old people. They were the ones who could sit there with a tiki or an ear pendant or something made out of jade, rub it with sandstone, polishing it. And I well remember one old lady down the East Coast who'd been with the early rebellions of Te Kooti in the East Coast. She was sitting there talking to me in Maori about her experiences as a young girl, and she had a greenstone pendant in her hand and a piece of sandstone, and she was busy rubbing on this.
Like caressing the stone.
No, she was polishing it.
Oh, really?
She was polishing it, and halfway through a sentence she'd go to sleep, and then half an hour later she'd wake up and her hand would start going again. So looking after children and polishing greenstone were two of the tasks that the old people did.
Do you have any idea how many hours or days it would take to make an average size hei tiki?
That's difficult to estimate in many ways, but normally a very well-made tiki would take up to a month or 2 months. Some of the hei tikis are actually made from early 19th century, are actually made from greenstone adzes.
Right, that are recycled.
The greenstone became redundant, and so they turned them into hei tikis, and they could trade those to Europeans without any trouble.
So I'm very curious about one thing in these display cases. We have some vegetation in the cases. What does that symbolize?
That represents the tangi. The green vegetation is the tangi, or the crying for the ancestors. So they put the green vegetation with these to show that they were sorry for the death of the ancestors, and the same thing as you do when you greet a person on the marae and do the hongi, which is pressing noses, which is just the same thing, expressing grief for their passing. And that's why these pieces of vegetation are here.
Well, that's fascinating. Let's move on to the next part of the collection.
Okay, we'll do that. First thing I wrote, that was the diary of Catherine Servant, who was a Marist priest in the Hokianga in 1838. He wrote up an account of New Zealand, the habits and customs of the New Zealanders. So I published that in 1976. I published about 14 books since then, so I keep on writing up things. I did a book on the meeting house in general, in various ways in which it's regarded in the different tribal areas, and then one that was meeting houses of Ngāti Porou, because I'd gone around and studied all the meeting houses there, photographed them and got the stories of how they were built and so on. Not the detailed history, because that belongs to the people of the marae. There are a lot of elders around the place, called mātuas, whose main interest in life was having a damn good discussion, because they're intellectuals. A person taught in the old Maori College of Learning is an intellectual equivalent to any university intellectual. And so we used to spend more time talking than we did doing anything else. Let's say publishing from there, and still publishing. One of the things I did in 73, I took off to the United States to record the Maori material in the museums of the United States and Canada. I did that and published it in 1962. I also did the same for Europe, from Helsinki to Rome, going all the way around there, recording the artifacts. So I left notes on the items that I've seen. I'd love to go back and look at all those things again. Yeah, I've got notebooks. All the information on the tribal areas and on the carvings of those areas and the sacred places of those areas, and also the genealogy, the key elements in the genealogy. which relate into that area. Part of my job is to pass it on to the inheritors of the knowledge. The sons of the chiefs and so on and so forth. That's part of the job. Make sure that they know it. It's not always easy because, as with in any culture, the young people are more interested in women and fast cars than they are in knowledge.
Well, here we are in front of this amazing storehouse front, and you have sort of the creation myth here of Maori, along with other aspects of Maori mythology. Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah, well, the doorway there represents what carving represents in Nukuoro, the female element of existence. In this case, it's Papatuanuku, the Earth Mother. And she is shown there, giving life into the world. Then down beneath her feet is a doorway flanked by the two gods of death. So that to go through that doorway was in fact a change of state. So if you didn't know the right prayers to go through that doorway, it might kill you. This was one of 3 storehouses, this is Tairuku Potaka, made to accompany 3 young people from different tribes, the paramount chiefs, the Ali'i Ariki, who were going into a college of learning at Marae Nui on the east coast. This one was for Kereru of Te Whanau Apanui. It was carved by a man called Apanui Ringamotu, Apanui who lost a finger because in carving it he cut off his own finger. And if you look at it, you can see that on the one side here looks very battered and very worn. This is because this belongs to the original house that stood at Marae Nui. Round about 1820, this house was moved from Marae Nui and it was to be re-erected at Te Kaha on the east coast. At that stage, one side had become rotten, and so they got another carver, Pukiake, to carve a replacement piece.
Around what time would that have been?
That's about 1820. And it was that time when the musket raiders were coming down from the north, and they would have loved to have taken this piece because to take it would have been an insult to the people there. So they hid it, first of all in a stream, and then later on it was put into a cave. And there it was found and eventually brought to the museum. But because it was still being carved, the old and the new are still there. Some of the epas, we could actually see old and new carved together. If we look at the old barge board there, you can see there's a curve down the bottom, a curve a little bit further back, and then a figure comes up into the body of a whale. First curve is the mouth of the whale, the second curve is the eye of the whale, and then the flukes are right up at the end. Now, against that figure are human figures representing the gods and manayas representing the spiritual world. That is what that represents. The carving is decorated with a type of decoration known as taratara kai, the notching of kai. This is because in the stories in the other world, Kai, who was a tohunga, a witchcraft expert, went to Tinirau, who was in charge of all the fishes in the sea, the son of Tangaroa, and because he had lost his mana, lost his canoe and lost his cloak, he asked Tinirau if he could borrow his pet whale to go to the island where he wanted to go to. Tinirau said, yes, if you do the prayers to send the whale back here. But when they got to the island where Kai was going, Kai did the prayers to drive the whale up on the shore, and he brought the people down to kill it and eat it. The smell of that whale cooking drifted back towards Tinirau, so he sent out his women. His women knew that Kai, as shown by the decoration they're doing, the twisting of Kai, had twisted teeth. So they did various types of hula, ending up with one called the poki poki, which was absolutely obscene. It was so obscene that Kai laughed and they saw who he was. And so they went back and they told Tinirau where he was. And he came, put him to sleep, and took him back to the island of Mutatapu, which is the island where Tinirau lived. And there he was killed. That is the first killing of man in this world.
It's amazing. Just the art quality of this piece, sculpturally, compared to this piece. Tell us more about this. I mean, here this is really art at its highest level, sculpture at its highest level. And here, this is, to me, more wood carving.
Yep. Up in Uiringamotu, the first carver was interested in shape and form, which, and if you look at it, you see that all the forms actually complement each other. Whereas the second carver who was doing the replacement was extremely good with stone tools, but he just wasn't as interested in shape and form. In other words, he was a very skillful man, but he was nowhere near the sculptor that Apanui Uringamoto had been. So there's a hell of a difference between those two sides.
It's just amazing, the difference.
There's one great big greenstone meri, which is in Auckland Museum, which the Aotearoa people wanted back because in 1976, for the Polyfest that they had that year, I took it down. I took it to the elders and I said, here is this meri. They looked at it. They didn't want to handle it. I said, what shall I do with it? And they said, oh, take it to the police station. We've made arrangements. I took it to the police station. They put it on a bunk in the police station and locked the door. And that's where they kept it overnight. And they said, it's too powerful for us to keep here, and we don't want it stolen, and that's the best place to put it. Then the next morning, when they were welcoming their guests, here they were with this great greenstone meri, fluttering it in the breeze. Right? And they were able to welcome their guests from all over the islands with the mana of the greenstone meri, katauri. And then after they'd finished with it, they could have said, okay, it's here, therefore it should stay. But in fact, the mana was so great that they said, we don't really want to keep it here. It's better if it's in the museum and we know where it is. That's the important part. That's the repository. You keep it for us. So I took it back to the museum. But that was a way of trying to keep the history. And that's respect. Part of my job.
Well, here we are in front of this very, very powerful post figure with this jade meri next to it. Can you tell me more about this?
Well, the figure depicted is Iwi Rākau from Tikapa, Ngāti Porou country on the east coast. He was one of the chiefs who was present in the colleges of learning at which the great storehouse Tairuku Pōtaka stood. He was a paramount chief of the Ngāti Porou people. His tattoo tells you that. And also, too, the meri, which is called Pōkai Whenua. Now, its full name is Tamatea Pōkai Whenua, Tamatea around the land, because it goes back to the origin of the Ngāti Kahungunu people of the east coast, Tamatea Pōkai Whenua, who travelled all the way around the north and south island of New Zealand. So that meri has round about 16 generations, if not more.
Well, is that all?
That's all.
And the figure itself, what time period would you say it was carved? Mid-19th century?
Yes, it's carved about 1860. It stood in the house of a chief called Te Wharehinga. So, because he was a chief, he had his hair tied up in a top knot on top there and then bound with cords. Those cords tell you the number of hapus that he was chief of.
Would have been a flax cord, right? Or...
Yep, that's right. My job in the museum, and my job as me, is to preserve knowledge and to preserve the mana, the prestige of the various tribes. A tiki got returned from the 1863 expedition, which had been given to Maximilian of Austria. It was returned back to New Zealand, and it was Ngāti Po from Waikato. It was given under the name of Wiremu Po, but the people who brought it back gave it to the kingitanga, because they thought that was what represented all of that. Okay, the kingitanga has many virtues, but old Maori system is, if you take something like that, which represents the mana of the tribe, and another tribe takes it, that tribe takes all the mana. And that's what's happened. So the kingitanga have taken over that tribe. They can no longer stand up as a separate group and talk. They have to talk through the kingitanga. So that was part of my job, or part of what I saw as my job anyway, to make sure that one tribe did not stamp on another tribe. They tried to, of course. They tried to get hold of something which belonged to the tribe so that they could take possession of it and so take over the tribe. But as far as I was concerned, and the time that I was there, that many tried, but nobody succeeded in doing that. Well, this is Te Tokia Tapiri, which is the last of the great war canoes, which was dedicated for war rather than for peace as a ceremonial canoe. Tapiri is shown on the stern of the canoe, but then going up on that stern are two ribs which actually divide and go down either side of the hull, right down to the prow, which shows again the creation of the world. And it comes right up here. This was carved about 1836, but carved with steel tools, and that shows up in the sharpness of the carving, by one of the great carvers, Rukupo, among others.
What size is this?
It's about 60 feet in all.
And it's one entire tree, correct?
It's one tree with another tree used for the sideboards. It was originally carved down the east coast. It came from Whakaki, the tree came from there. It was one of three built to patrol the coasts of New Zealand by the tribes. And then after the wars were over, the people of this area, Ngāti Te, who had given a piebald stallion to the people of the north as part of the gifts for making peace, claimed the canoe as theirs. And so the canoe was brought up to Auckland, and for many years it was out in the Manukau harbour. Then during the war, 1863, it was confiscated by the British Army, left on the beach at Onehunga, and at that stage some midshipman tried to blow it up and he didn't succeed.
Incredible. So this is during the Maori Wars, right?
That's during the Maori Wars in the
1860s.
And then in 1869, it was refurbished and new strakes were put on it. and it became the flagship for the regatta in Auckland, which is held every year on the anniversary of the founding of Auckland Province and Auckland City. And then even later still, it was bought and put in the museum, which then was in Princes Street. And while it was in Princes Street in 1889, Noa Huku, one of the great chiefs, came to this war canoe, and he did the prayers that put the dead from the wars between Maoris and Europeans into this canoe. So it holds all those as well. But at a later period, the Cook Island people who had served in the First World War with the Maori Battalion bought a great old voyaging canoe to Aotearoa to Auckland Museum. And their elders met with the elders of the Maori people, and they gave the name to Aotearoa, the blue sky of heavens, to this canoe. So it's got two names, Te Tokia Tāpiri and Te Aotearoa. The Maori elders gave this name also to Te Aotearoa. So it's got two names, Te Aotearoa, Te Tokia Tāpiri. To get into this canoe is tapu. To get out of it is tapu.
Wow. So this is the type of canoe that would have greeted the first Pakeha visitors to New Zealand, such as Cook and before.
Yeah, although one of the canoes which is labelled as a war canoe in the drawings by Captain Cook is not a war canoe, it's a ceremonial canoe. Some of the others are not, they're real war canoes, real fishing canoes. The museum is a repository for things like that, which have mana, have prestige, have been owned by many generations, and therefore are powerful in their own right. One marae I went to north, an old lady was there, Okuia, and her granddaughter, and they had a whole chest full of manuscripts, books written by their grandparents on their genealogies and on their land and on their history and so on and so forth. And she allowed me to look at some of it. It was a terrific treasure. I went back there about 10 years later, and she died. The granddaughter was still there, but she was very sad in life. I said, "What's happened?" "The books. They've been buried." So I went to her elder brothers, then looked at them. I said, "Have any of you got the knowledge to do the prayers to uncover those books?" And they said, "No." I just looked at them. They'd effectively buried their own history and no way of getting it out. So part of what I used to do in the museum was that if I'd go and look at such books, I would ask if I could borrow them. Sometimes I could. I'd bring them back to the museum, get them copied, and then take the books back. And then say to the people, "Look, those copies are under tapu. Nobody else can look at them except you."
Well, here we're standing in front of the greatest masterpiece, in my opinion, from Central Polynesia and the Auckland collection. And I believe this was from the famous Oldman collection.
Yeah, it's part of the Oldman collection that was purchased by the New Zealand government. The collection was distributed among the various museums in New Zealand. It's from Raivavai in the Austral Islands. It's very interesting because it does have certain relationships with other Polynesian art and also with, to a certain extent, with early Maori art. Just the same as the designs used on the figure become what Peter Buck called the kicking K.
Right.
In Aitutaki and other carving in the Cook Islands. What the figure represents, we've got no information, although Considering the Polynesian ideas and what's happening here on the knees and so on, it's probably again representing the spiritual world and the Earth Mother.
Which is the essence of Polynesian art in a way.
That's right.
Well, David, it's been incredible sharing this knowledge with you, and thank you very much. I look forward to the next time we can get together here at the museum. Let's go have a drink, some of that great New Zealand wine.
And do some more talking.
Yes.
And that's really the whole story of what I've done and seeking to understand the way in which people have lived in this land and their stories, because their stories are quite inspiring.